I'm working on laying out the electrical, so I've put the seat board in temporarily. This fits right up against the front of the case, and the pendulum swings right here. Here's my electrical box, and there is my conduit. I've laid the pendulum in here just to see, and if I turn the box sideways like this, there is still clearance for the pendulum bob to fit through there. I need to support this box somehow. I need to work up some kind of metal angle behind it, and I also need to cut the conduit off a lot lower. But I wanted to make sure that I decided on the orientation so that this would not be a problem with the clock operation. It should be good because the seat board is wider than the box, so I should be all right there. And I know I'm all right with the bob because I tested that. So I think what I'm going to do is cut these tabs off, and then we will use holes right through the back of the box into some kind of angled arrangement, and that will get us our electrical boxes in here. This was my answer for supporting the electrical box. This is a post base with some angle that I bolted on here and painted. We'll see what the electrical inspector says. I would think this would be fine, but there is not a lot written about this kind of project inside a street clock, so hopefully it'll be okay. Grateful for a compact hammer drill. We're about 30 days after the foundation was laid, so the concrete is pretty much cured. I'm going to prime this with a concrete primer and then paint it some dark color so that this disappears a little bit, and also so that the concrete won't retain moisture quite as much. I have painted the inside of the clock for the same reason, just to keep moisture from coming through the concrete. I'm hoping this will mean that it will shed the moisture from snow a little bit more readily rather than soaking in and keeping the clock wet. After a little deliberation, we decided to go with a brown paint that will match some paving stones that will eventually go around here. So, coated this on the primer, and hopefully we can call the base done. I'm trying to weather seal this as best I can, and there's quite a bit of a gap actually. If you look at this, this is 1/2 inch plus. And the way that I work this out is I have a door seal on the inside here that fit pretty well. I started at the bottom and then worked up sort of roofing style. And then I'm doing the same on the case side. And so that this is hidden when you see it, I taped around the door as is visible when you have it here. So I know how to keep the foam out of the line of sight. I think this is going to be okay. The important thing is it's going to take some pressure to close this on the seal, so if somebody doesn't know that they've got to push on it, they could potentially break the key off because there is going to be some pressure there. But I think it's going to be okay, and I think that was a good solution to this problem. I've done several rounds of painting on this, and trying to navigate the green and the gold and the seal cover all together is a little bit of a challenge, but we are probably 95% done with the exterior of this. I'm just trying to get the clock totally weather sealed without relying on tape or tarps or anything like that. On the back axis panel, this is a foam seal because this gap was a lot smaller. There were no hinges to contend with, and it was fairly uniform. Did this the same way, so the pieces overhang like a little roof, but that is doing the job to keep that all dry. At the bottom of the clock are these holes. There's two larger holes that are, 3/4 of an inch in diameter. I don't know what they're for. I have window screen on the inside to keep bugs out, but I do think rain might get in there. So these other ones on the side here are just small diameter holes for screws. I'm going to have to make something to cover this that's more permanent. Right now I've got it sealed up with a little electrician's duct seal, but that's TBD. Anyway, the mode of this clock is trying to not be so much waterproof or watertight as just vented. So there are some little gaps on the seal here where any water could potentially egress. I left this here intentionally just to give there somewhere for it to go. The concrete is beveled a little bit away from the bottom of the clock, so I don't expect standing water in there. The inside of the clock is primed, so water shouldn't soak into the slab very much there and should find its way out eventually. To get the weather stripping to fit, I actually need to shim this lock away from the door a little bit, as the weather stripping is kind of thick. So I took it off and thought we might as well open it up and see what's in here. Just before I open it, here is our key, and this is we're looking at the front of the lock, so this key goes in this way. And we can see these tumblers moving, and that's what allows the bolt to retract. And then again, see if I can get the camera to focus here. So that's that mechanism. Let's take it open, see what we got on the inside. There we go. We've got some spring return tumblers here. And then our bolt at the back. This is a somewhat more complicated version of the lock that I did in a YouTube video a couple years ago of a tall case clock that basically only had one tumbler. So here we can see this one has a number 5 on it, and behind it is a number 4. See if I can get this out and have some chance of getting this back in the right order. So 5 was first, then 4, and if we look at these, you can see, first of all, these are probably hand carved, but the offset is slightly different for these numbers, and that corresponds to the different positions in the key. So I don't know exactly where this starts counting, but it's toward the end of the key here, so maybe that's 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, something like that. So this is the inside of the lock. While I've got it apart here, I'm going to do a little bit of oiling, and we'll get this back together and shimmed so that it can close on the weather stripping on the door. Here's a better view of the key working on these tumblers. See, they push from the bottom, and the different heights of this cause the slot to align, which is what causes the bolt to be able to retract. Oops. The keys that have the farther teeth push these bolts farther, so it actually acts on the bottom of these tumblers. Before I get too far, one thing I want to do is actually make a new key. This is the only one I have, and it's actually, first of all, valuable because it's the original key, but second of all, it's a little bit vulnerable. The way that the clock is weather sealed is there's a rubber seal around the door that needs to be compressed a little bit to keep the water out. And that compression puts tension on the lock mechanism unless you actually push on the door to open it up. And that's just a risky thing. So what I'm going to do here is just manually trace this and then do a little metal cutting bandsaw and file work and recreate this key. Let's see how I did. Well, that's hard to see in the camera, but that's actually going to be a pretty decent replica here. So I'm going to get to work filing that out. This is about as close as I dare get it with power tools, so now it's time for some hand filing. Well, this is what I came up with. I did a bunch of hand filing and was able to get this to actually work in the clock. I've tried it. It's dark right now, or I'll show you, but it does fit and it does operate the clock. It's a little crude in places because this was handwork, but I think it's actually acceptable for my purposes, which was just to basically not be putting this original key at risk every time I use the clock. So I think we're in good shape on this. The last thing I'm going to do is put this in the polisher to try to give this a little nicer finish. And we've got a great working key.